Well, of all the movies in our summer movie series that we've been looking at, I get the one with the biggest budget and the most controversy. The movie Noah came out in 2014, released by Paramount, and created some discussion. How did it come to be? Well, there was the director and the co-writer, Darren Aronofsky, had recently done a couple films which got a lot of attention. The first one was The Wrestler, which kind of rebooted Mickey Rourke's career, got him an Academy Award nomination. And then Natalie Portman was in Black Swan, and she got an Academy Award. And when you get to that place in Hollywood, people say to you, what's your next film? What do you want to do? And we'd be happy to finance it. And he went for the big epic, and the big biblical epic too, and decided to do the story of Noah. Darren Aronofsky is Jewish. He's a Harvard grad. And for him, he felt this movie was very personal. He had heard the story growing up, and someone had read it to him, I don't know, bedtime story, and he just felt like he wanted to do his take on it. Well, how did it do? Well, interesting in comparison to the other two films that we've looked at in this series, it did make the most money. Domestically, it made $101 million. Foreign, $359 million total. So they made a lot of money. Now the budget for it, though, was $125 million. So that was about 3 times the budget. But you got to take into consideration how much they really promoted this film. I think it had a Super Bowl ad, which alone is $125 million. But it was constantly being promoted and promoted. So making 3 times the budget sounds good, but with everything they had done to promote it, probably not as good. But when we look at the other 2 films in our series, Heaven is for Real made $96 million, but it was done on a budget of $12 million. So that's about 8 times the budget, and the 2 had some promotion about it. But God's Not Dead was made for $2 million, and it made $60 million. That's 30 times the budget, and it was never advertised anywhere. It was just the Christian community that really promoted it. So with those figures, really, God's Not Dead was the most successful. And of course, this is a great place for me to plug that we are showing God's Not Dead on tonight, 7 p.m., downtown campus. We had it here on Friday, very successful, about 150 people here. Everybody really enjoyed it. If you haven't seen it, please come and see it. It really is a good film. Now, and get ready, because there's another Christian film coming out, Exodus, Gods and Kings, telling the story of Moses by director Ridley Scott. And so we don't know what to expect for that, but we'll be watching. Hopefully it won't be another Noah. Noah did get some things right, but mostly it got a lot of things wrong in its telling of the story. The parts that it got wrong were just totally unbiblical. I mean, like complete fantasy. Like at times just leaving you scratching your head. Even to the most casual reader of the story of Noah, they're like, where did he come up with that? But should people in Hollywood be allowed to take the stories, the biblical stories, and sort of do their own take on those sort of things and present it as they see it? Well, obviously for us, being in the church and having the Word of God, I mean, truth is important. And we want the Bible to be depicted accurately, and that's why we're here today every week to do that. And we're in the truth business, but Hollywood is in the money-making business. So when a director like Darren Aronofsky comes along and says, here's my vision for it and the track record of success that he had, they are going to finance his vision. But do they have any business messing with the Bible? Here's my take on it. My take on it is in any film that gets people talking and thinking and discussing the Bible, I think that's what's really important. I think that's what Noah did. I mean, do we need another Neighbors movie with a heavy R rating or sex tape? And do we need another Transformers? I mean, really, haven't we seen enough of them? But here comes a film that at least got people talking about. In fact, Bible Gateway said that during that time that the Noah movie was out, they saw a 223% increase in the reading of Genesis 6 through 9 during that time. People did want to know the truth, and they went to the source to find out the Bible. The American Bible Society said that as it looked at its Facebook followers and what they were talking about and what was trending, Noah was being talked about with many people. And so here's a film that came along and may not have been accurate, but it did get people talking. And let's be truthful and honest here. A lot of things that come out, like the Bible series, which everybody was like, yeah, this is it. Thank you so much. It wasn't accurate. You know, people that know the Bible are watching it going, well, that didn't happen there. And that person didn't say that line in the Bible. And that incident occurred later, not earlier. So nobody is completely accurate when it comes to portraying these stories. The place you got to go is the Bible. So even though, sometimes Hollywood may not get the Noah story correct, it doesn't mean that the story is irrelevant. We have to look to it. Now, let's talk about a few things where the Noah movie got it wrong. Just so in case you ever watch it or you watched it or you had any questions, I'm going to give you 10 things. First of all, it said in the movie he only took one son with him on the ark in the movie, where the Bible said clearly that he had all 3 sons and their wives, a total of 8 people. It also says that Noah was 600 years old when he was putting together the ark. Now, I don't want to sit there and look at a 600-year-old man. I mean, I'd rather look at Russell Crowe at 50 years old, wouldn't you? But if you want some idea of what Noah looked like during that time, it was probably something like this. Just to give you an idea. It also says that the son with the wife had 2 daughters, twin daughters, and that maybe those daughters were to marry their uncles or something. I'm not quite sure what that was, but it doesn't say any of that in the Bible. Noah sought advice from his grandfather Methuselah, who's played by Anthony Hopkins, and he went to him to say, I want to understand this vision from God. And Noah didn't need any clarification. He didn't have to go talk to Methuselah. He understood very clearly what God wanted him to do. And also, Methuselah is sort of shown as this kind of witch doctor. He's got some mental health issues or something. But, obviously when you want to draw Anthony Hopkins to a role, you got to make it interesting, but it's not necessarily biblical. There's no showdown with a villain on board of the ark. But movies need a dramatic climax, and they need a good versus evil kind of moment that you leave with, so they inserted that. When Noah learns that his son's wife is expecting, he says if it's a girl, it needs to be killed because God does not want to repopulate the earth. He felt that God was so mad at all of humanity that really his only job was to save the animals and nothing else, that the earth was going to be like a big zoo with no humans on it. But that's not the case. Noah knew very clearly that he was to repopulate the earth. Also, some animals in the movie are portrayed as being killed on the ark. Well, that's bad news for that species, if that were to occur. Apparently that was the unicorn that got killed on the ark, since we don't see that around. But it also said that they were all anesthetized in order to go to sleep, because they're trying to figure out, well, how would these animals sort of sit still for that long? But look, if God wants to do something, he can tell the animals to sit, and they'll do so until he says, okay, you can go now. It also, there's a little depiction in there as Noah's explaining creation, that a little evolutionary theism comes into play. And you can actually see this clip on YouTube. They have it, and it starts out beautifully. You're like, wow, that's so good. Man, I got to show that in church. That's really good, the way they explain it. And then all of a sudden, this little creature in the water grows legs and walks on land. You go, oh, there it is. So he doesn't say it out loud, but they certainly depict it. So that's not the way the earth was created. And then finally, the Nephilim are also protected as these kind of big rock creatures that help Noah to build the ark, because they have to explain how a 600-year-old man can build the ark. And so they said, well, obviously it had some giants, rock creatures that came in and helped him. And then they defended the ark too. Again, that was all fantasy. Don't know where that came from. They're trying to portray these angels as being hardened by the earth. And so they had sort of taken the rocks and the earth into their being, and they were doomed. And I don't know. But anyway, that's not in the Bible. Now, but Noah got some things right. And I think there's some good things in here, especially that devastation scene. You saw some clips of it there. I mean, it is breathtaking. And I think that's pretty accurate. I think when the earth was destroyed, I mean, God took the faucet and put it on full, and the water came flying out of the earth, and the water came down from the sky. I mean, you got to fill the earth up in 40 days, and so that's a lot of water coming really fast. It wasn't a drizzle that happened, and so I think the film did a good job of that. So watch that part. I really liked it. The people on the earth were portrayed as very evil. That had to be accurate. looking out for their own self-interest at all times. Probably some of them, and again, I'm just conjecturing, but some of them probably ran for the ark. I don't know. You'd have to think that here's this guy building this ark and talking about these things, and all of a sudden it happens. I got to go, he's right, let's get on board. There had to be some sort of stampede for safety. I think the arrival of the animals in the movie, very beautiful, very touching. And just imagine if you were Noah's family, just to see all that work they had put into it, and all of a sudden the animals start showing up. And I thought the film did a good job of that. And I'm sure to some level Noah struggled with his calling. At some point, it says when he finally got off the ark, he made a vineyard and got drunk. It was like the first thing he wanted to do. I need a drink, right? And so what was going through his mind during that time? Did he have to say that he would get to that point? So was there a little bit of struggle with him? Look, he's human like us. Would we have struggled? Sure. So I thought the film, tried to talk about that and explain it. Now, that's the good and bad of the movie in case you ever see it or have seen it. But let me tell you some of the things about the Noah story. The truth that we know from the story in the Bible is still very relevant, very applicable to who we are as people today. It's not an ancient story. There are truths in there that we need to apply. And the first thing is this: God needs more righteous people on earth. In Genesis 6:1, it said Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Imagine, of all the people he looked at, only one had found favor. And when I think of Noah, I think of this scene in Tiananmen Square. I don't know if you remember Tank Man, but he was the unknown protester. They have no idea who this was or whatever happened to him. But when he stood in front of this line and a column of tanks that were rolling in after the massacre that occurred on June 5th in 1989, you really came to respect this guy. There was something about him. What would cause him to stand there and kind of just say, stop? And it seems that in our world that evil is sort of taking over by force. Doesn't it seem that way? That the tanks of evil are rolling in and crushing morality and all that is good. We have that feeling today. But the world really evolves with evil. The world is always saying this is what's acceptable and this is what is unacceptable. But now it's using different ways of communicating it. There's no new evil. There's just new ways of expressing it. In fact, through technology now, we know more about the evil that is happening. If something evil happens, people tweet it, boom, there we go. We all know about it. It's out there. But in that time, it took a long time for people to understand what was going on in people's lives. And so there was probably a lot of evil going on, but we just didn't know about it. So the world is changing and evolving. It's finding new ways of using technology and things, of making us aware to allow us to sin, but there is no new evil. But think about Noah at the time. He was living in a world where it was 99.99999% evil. That is certainly not our world today. There's a few good people, I would hope, here today. But at his time, it was down to him. He was the last. So things were much worse. But God said, I am down to one family, but I can use that family. I can use one family to bring righteousness back to the earth. But maybe that's you. Maybe where you are at school, in your place of business, in your neighborhood, in your family. Maybe you are the last remnant of righteousness. And God is saying, I need you to stand up. It may seem that there's so much evil and it's pouring in and it's taken over by force, but God can still use you. So stand up to evil. Are you going to be called names? Sure, I bet Noah was. But people walked by him and mocked him and called him ridiculous and an idiot for doing such a thing. But he kept on doing what he needed to do. And the question is really going to come up, but whose favor are you seeking? The world's? The people on the outside? Or are you seeking God's favor? There are many places where Noah is mentioned, and every time they talk about his righteousness. In fact, in Ezekiel 14:14, think about what's going on in the time of Ezekiel. They had been exiled. The people had been moved out of Israel, had been put in Babylon, and they were sort of trapped there. And they're saying, how can we be saved? And Ezekiel says in 14:14, even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they could only save themselves by their righteousness, declares the sovereign Lord. So righteousness will save you. But at that time, it was down to like the top three in Ezekiel's eyes. And we know we're talking about Noah's story right now, but look at Daniel. Daniel stood up to the government. The government said no prayer. He said, I'm praying with my windows open 3 times a day. I don't care what the government says. And he stood up to it. And guess what? Even when he was thrown in the lion's den, he was preserved because God wanted his righteousness, that type of person, to be on the earth. You look at Job. You know, all of his friends were saying to him, you must be unrighteous, Job. You must have done something for all these bad things to happen to you. And he said, no, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm still connected to God. These things happen just because bad things happen to good people. And that's part of God's plan, and I'm fine with it. So all of them have the same type of story, preserving their righteousness in the face of evil. God is asking us to do that. We need to be the kind of people that God would brag about us. In Hebrews 11:7, and of course we know Hebrews 11, they're talking about all these Old Testament characters and their faith and what they were able to do. And Noah gets mentioned. He says, by faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. And by his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is keeping with faith. An heir of righteousness. So much death that had occurred. What did he get? What was his inheritance from all that? What was it that he could pass on to future generations? Righteousness. Being in a right relationship with God. That's what he passed on to them. And we can receive that inheritance too. The inheritance of righteousness, and we're asked to pass it on to future generations. And then 2 Peter mentions Noah. And he says, if he, God, did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others. What Peter here says is that Noah was a proclaimer, a preacher of righteousness, which meant he, through his actions and through his words, he stood up for what was right. Now, did he have any converts? No, didn't have any converts, but it didn't matter. He proclaimed anyway and stood up to what was wrong. The second thing that's so important about this story is Noah followed instructions. Genesis 6:22 says Noah did everything just as God commanded him. Now take a look at this representation of the ark. Now this is a little too nice, I think. It's a little too polished. It looked like he stained it when he was all done. It's got the nice little bow on it. Do you think he'd really be spending that much time on it? And again, I'm going to look at the movie. I'm going to say I think the movie had a pretty good representation of what the ark was like. It was really nothing more than probably a box. And the length of it would have been a football field and a half. Look how long that was. And it was 3 stories high. God told him to build it with 3 stories. He also said, put a door on it, right? That's practical. How is anyone going to get in unless there's a door? And then also he said, put windows on it. Again, very practical. Stuck inside this box, you need oxygen, and the smell of the animals needs to get out. And so all of that is very practical. But he also, God said a couple of things. I want you to put on the inside a pitch, in order to keep it sealed. And he also said very specifically, I want you to use cypress wood, also known as gopher wood in some translations. Now imagine if Noah had said, you know what? I'm going to cut some corners. I'm going to take some shortcuts in the building of this project. You know what, this tar that I'm getting, it takes too long to mix. It takes too long to get it. I'm going to use something else, mud maybe. Well, imagine what happens when that mud hits the water. It's gone. You're sunk. Imagine if he had said, you know what, the cypress wood, I'm going to use something else. Maybe I'll use a mahogany. It'll look prettier. And the people, when they see the boat, will go, wow, what a magnificent boat that is. But mahogany is one of the heaviest woods out there. Sunk again. If you look up cypress wood today, and you can go on a construction site, some of you are probably builders too, even today, the benefits of cypress wood is this. It's durable. It's easy to handle. I think you're going to need that if you're making something of that size. And it's rot resistant. Boy, if you're marinating in water for about a year, you want a rot resistant wood. But Noah had taken shortcuts. It would have all been sunk. So God gives us very clear instructions too. And he says, this is exactly what I want you to do. But we sometimes say, yeah, but that doesn't really apply to me in this situation. Or I'm going through a tough time, so I'm going to do things this way. And when we don't follow the instructions, we too find that our lives are sunk. What are those things that God tells us to do? Well, we got the 10 Commandments, right? That's a good outline, right? 10 things. Boy, if I can keep those 10 things, I'll be okay. Well, what about the 2 things that God says, the greatest commandments? Yeah, those are good too. If you can work that way in your life and fulfill those 2, I mean, it's going to be great. But you have to know all the specifics, and that God is very specific when you read through the Bible about us taking care of our families and loving our wife and husband and not making our children angry and getting rid of lust in our life and treating people with respect as we want to be treated, love sacrificially, and taking care of the forgotten and disadvantaged. And it goes on and on and on, and we need to know those things. And we have to fulfill them specifically. So we too have been given instructions. We need to pay attention. No shortcuts, no excuses, following God's righteousness. The third thing is Noah waited patiently. Can you remember the storms of 2004? How many of you were around for those storms, the storms that is, the hurricane? Wow. Yeah, and, Charlie, that first one that came in, I mean, that really did some damage. And as a storm, it lasted about 5 days. It was fast and it was furious. Francis hit right after that. And if you remember, it just sort of sat over us, just constantly churning water and just rained and rained on top of us. We were still recovering from the other one, and we got this other storm that sort of came in. And then Ivan gave us a little scare, but if you're up in the panhandle, it really did some damage up there. And Ivan lasted 22 days, and then we had Gene. And Gene, when it hit it as a storm, total, it lasted for 15 days from its inception to its deterioration. And the time from the Charlie landfall to the moment that Gene disappeared was 40 days. Now, do we have any idea of what Noah went through? Not specifically. I mean, for him, it was constant rain for 40 days, stuck inside of a box with no power or electricity, right? And we only had power. Some of us didn't have power or electricity for maybe 3 days a week, some people a month. It wasn't quite to that level. We too got impatient, didn't we? We were wondering, when is the government going to come in here and clean up this mess? I remember on our street, we had so many trees fall down. We laid all the trees in the street around all of our neighbors' places. We had a fortress this high around all of our front lawns. I mean, it looked like we were at war with each other. And nobody would come and pick it up, and we got impatient too. And where was the food? And where was the water? And we just went on and on. So we understand a little bit about that, but Noah had it worse. He had it way worse. It says the amount of time, it rained 40 days and 40 nights, but the floodwaters covered for another 150 days after that. And the rain, it said, started on the 2nd month of Noah's 600th year of life. And the waters receded on the 7th month. And on the 10th month, they finally saw the tops of the mountains. And then the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year of existence, the water began to dry up. And at the end of the 2nd month, the earth was completely dry. That is 1 year. 1 year he had to put up with this situation. Now, what if at some point along there, Noah said, you know what? I'm out of here. I'm bailing. Right to the bottom. Where would he go? You did not want to get out of that ship too early. And some of us are wondering, when is it going to happen? When is that big thing going to occur in my life? What is my life going to be like in 1 year? Let me make a projection of where I think I should be. And then let me make it happen. Well, you may be trying to do something a little too early that God had not intended. Maybe it's that promotion that you're waiting for, that job change, or that relationship status, and you want to hurry it and push it along. But guess what? If it happens too early and you don't wait patiently, you too could be sunk. So God has to first change the landscape. There are things he is doing outside of your situation. And once you're able to come in and land in harbor, and God says, now it's time to get off and go on to the next stage, that's what you want to wait for. He has to clean up some messes in the lives of other people, in the lives of your job, your school, whatever it is. He's doing a work out there. And then he'll call you to join him and to be a part of it. And then there's the last point. And the last point is very simple. He says, be fruitful and multiply. In Genesis 9:7, very clear, God talks to Noah. As for you, Noah, be fruitful and increase in number, multiply on the earth and increase upon it. Well, for Noah, what did that mean? Well, it meant have lots of kids and grandkids and great-grandkids. He wanted him to multiply the population because it was just down to 8. And Noah followed instructions, but he's also saying to him, I want you to multiply your righteousness to these people. I want you to pass on your faith to all those that are following you. I want more people like you, Noah, on the earth, not those who were here before. And God gives us that same challenge today. He is saying to us that he needs more people that are righteous, more people that follow him, to pass that faith on to our families and to the people that we come in contact with. So as we look at all of these points, what is God saying to us through the story of Noah? It's this: God needs righteous people to face up the evil in this world and to follow his instructions precisely, to wait patiently for him to act and to multiply his legacy in the generations to come. That's the real story of Noah. So in the face of the evil that we see in our world today, God needs Noahs to stand up and to be righteous.